Okay, so back in the 1980s, file size was kind of different than it is now. Because if you wanted to make a game, say a Nintendo NES game, you had maybe a maximum of 256 kilobytes of space to store all of the data. The graphical data, the sound data, everything. 256 kilobytes. To put that into perspective, that is approximately the size of one frame of an HD YouTube video today. One frame. Like that is 1/30th of a second of YouTube video. And they had to store an entire video game on that. So, needless to say, they had to kind of be very careful about the way they stored data. So they were trying to design like the Nintendo architecture. They were trying to come up with a way to store as much data as possible and have as many graphics as possible. And they came up with a number that made it so they could store enough data for their needs. They figured out that if they could just have 4 colors on the screen, just 4 colors, they would be able to store all of the data that they needed for all of the graphics. Just 4 colors on the screen. But they didn't like the idea of having to store 4 colors on the screen. That didn't sound fun at all. The Nintendo architecture was capable of displaying 256 different colors. And they didn't want to be limited to just 4. They would just look like Atari 2600 games. And that was a console of the past. That was 5 years ago. So they went back to the drawing board and tried to come up with a way to have more than 4 colors. But every time they tried to come up with it, there was no way. Even adding just one more color, even having 5 colors would make them have to double the size of all of the graphical data. Because the way that computers kind of read data is interesting and also kind of picky. A computer will only read a piece of data if it is stored in the number that is a multiple, not a multiple, that is a power of 2. So if you take 2 and you multiply it by itself over and over again, it's only those numbers that a computer will accept. Like 2 times 2 is 4, 4 times 2 is 8, 8 times 2 is 16, 16 times 2 is 32, those kinds of numbers. That's all that a computer can read. So yeah, if you want to have even 5 colors, one more color, you'd really just have to double it and make it 8 colors, which would take way too much space. So they were about to give up on having more than 4 colors on the screen. When one of them, a clever little guy, don't know what his name was, but it was probably just one guy, he looked at the screen and said, "Hey, if we can only put 4 colors on the screen, what if instead of trying to make more colors available on the screen, what if we just made more screens available? What if we split up the screen into multiple screens? And then in those screens, you could only have 4 colors each. But each of the colors could be different because you could have different sets of colors for different screens." And so that's exactly what they did. It worked out perfectly. It's basically the same kind of thing that you see like when you're playing a fighting game and you select a character with a different color palette. They basically just change the palette for each section of the screen on the Nintendo. And that's the way that they do it. That's the way they solved it. They were able to have many more colors than they should have been capable of having just by being a little bit creative. It's pretty cool, huh?